Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of the EUdemos Jean Monnet network with a stakeholder. Today, we have the pleasure of having here Domènec Ruiz Devesa, who is the current president of the Union of European Federalists and member of the Action Committee for the United States of Europe. He is also former member of the European Parliament. I am Sara Bertolli, journalist for Euractiv Italia. I will be chairing this webinar. So first of all, welcome Domènec, and welcome also to all students that are following this webinar. My idea was first to have a speech by Domènec, and after to open the floor for the question from the students. The title that we wanted to, general title that we wanted to address for this webinar is Strengthening European Democracy, since today we see a lot of challenges and attacks to the European democracy coming from both external intrusion, let's say from, for example, Russia, that try to change the results of some elections, even in European countries, but also from internal attacks coming from those that can be addressed as illiberal democracy, for example, Hungary. So, giving this small premise, I will now immediately leave the floor to Domènec, that will of course clear all of these doubts regarding which are the current attacks to the European democracy, and especially how can we strengthen European democracy and defend our democratic continent. The floor is yours, Domènec. You have 25 minutes, and then we open the floor for the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Sara, for this invitation, this kind invitation to you and to Professor Castaldi. I'm very honored to be able to deliver this short lecture for your students. And indeed, the democratic question, we can say, is an old one in a way in the European Union. Let's remember in 1950, when the communities were announced and then created, the Parliament, the European Parliament as a legislative power, was, in a way, we can say, an afterthought. Why I'm saying that? Because in reality, even though it was included, this parliamentary assembly, since the beginning in the Treaty of Paris of 1951, which already was an achievement, because a standard international organization doesn't have a parliament. Let's think of the United Nations, doesn't have a parliament or a parliamentary assembly. So that the European communities from the beginning were something different, that were supranational, not just international, and that were creating a political community with a federal vision. This was also clear in the Schuman Declaration. Still, clearly, it started as the least powerful of the institutions. The Commission, at the time, the high authority, had the power to propose legislation. The Council of Ministers had the power of amending and approving them. And the first parliamentary assembly of the coal and steel community did not have any legislative power at all. It did have the power to approve or not to approve the budget of the community, which is, by the way, an important power that it should not be underestimated. And in fact, parliaments, medieval parliaments, think of the British, the English Parliament of the Magna Carta, for instance, the first power parliaments gain vis-a-vis the sovereign, the king, was precisely the power to approve taxes to finance the royal army. So this is also an interesting aspect of the European integration, that from the beginning the parliament had this budgetary power, but not the legislative power, and not also the fact, and it did not have also an important requirement, which is that the original parliament, again, I'm speaking 1951, 1952 to be precise, it was not elected directly by the citizens. So the fact that we didn't have a parliament with legislative power and that was not popularly elected gave birth to the concept we can say in European political science or in political science about Europe or about European integration, the concept of the democratic deficit. And this concept has been around for a long time, even today. My interpretation, if we look at the more than 75 years of integration of Europe, is that this democratic deficit has been going down. It has been undergoing a reduction over time, but it has not yet been, fully tackled. So there is still a gap to be filled, and this is what I will try to explain. But first, why I will claim that there has been this reduction? Well, as you may know, since 1979, the Parliament, which now is called for a long time European Parliament, not Parliamentary Assembly anymore, which is also, it's a symbolic change in the name, but that has a political message. Well, since 1979, it will be 40 years in 2029 at the moment of the next European elections. Well, for almost 40 years now, the parliament is elected by the citizens, and it is not, as before, composed of national parliamentarians. And this is, of course, this was one of the main criticisms at the time, and this is why, once again, we talked for decades in the 50s, in the 60s, up to the late 70s of the democratic deficit. By the way, this gap was filled not by coincidence and not certainly not by chance, or not only by goodwill of some government leaders, even though some played an important role, like Helmut Schmidt and Giscard, at the time German Chancellor and French President, but because since the early 50s, since the creation of the Parliamentary Assembly, there was a huge civil society campaign undertaken by the Union of European Federalists and the European Movement, and also the Action Committee for the United States of Europe, created in 1955 by Jean Monnet himself. Well, these three bodies in particular advocated for many years consistently for the popular election of the European Parliament, which in fact happened in 1979. But then we had to wait even longer for the legislative power. The legislative power did not come in 1979. It did not come with the Single European Act of 1986. It came in 1993 with the Treaty of Maastricht, 1992, and not for all legislation. And we had to wait until the Treaty of Lisbon of 2007, when we had the legislative power of the Parliament as the ordinary legislative procedure with Council, with now still some remaining exceptions. And that, by the way, I will tackle this in a moment. This is part of the remaining, if we can call it this way, democratic deficit. But since 2007, the ordinary procedure for legislation in Europe, for adopting legislation, is codecision. Codecision means that legislation is proposed by the Commission as the executive of the Union and is amended and adopted jointly by the European Parliament and by the Council. And this, by the way, is a classical feature of federal unions or federal states. Why? Because you have a parliament that is elected directly by the citizens, the European Parliament, and you have the Council where you have the representatives of the member states. So the Chamber of the Citizens or the Chamber of the Citizens representatives and the Chamber of the States representatives. This is very familiar for this design is federal design is very familiar, for instance, to Germans. Because in Germany, which is a federal republic, you have the Bundestag, elected by the citizens, and the Bundesrat, where you have the state representatives. So, just to sum up and for clarity, we have in 1979 and in 2007 filled a big chunk of the democratic deficit, because we have a parliament that now is elected by the citizens, and we have also a parliament that has legislative powers. Now, we still have some important bits that we have to tackle to solve completely the democratic deficit and to improve the role of the citizens in European integration. First, the question of legislative initiative. The European Parliament at the moment does not have the power to propose legislation. And this is a serious matter because, once again, a traditional power of parliaments is to propose legislation. So the executives do not have the monopoly of legislative initiative. Now, it is true that in contemporary times, the powers of parliament to propose legislation is not so much utilized because the complexity of our societies makes that the executives are in the position to propose legislation, in a better position to propose legislation. Why? Because they have the access to all the technical details, the knowledge that national parliaments in particular struggle to have the same amount of information as a public administration, as the executive branch. So the majority of legislative proposals in the member states came from the government. However, this power exists and sometimes is used. And in some parliaments more than others, for instance, the French parliament. This is also in relation with the fact that the electoral system in France is different to elect the parliament to many member states. So the MPs are elected locally in open races. So the connection to their local constituency and their power base is not so much determined by the party line. But in any event, the fact that the European Parliament, does not have the power to propose legislation, except in a few exceptions, and those are the electoral law, the ombudsman, and the powers of inquiry of Parliament. In these three cases, we do have, or the European Parliament has the right to propose legislation, but not in the other topics. So this is one important issue that we will have to solve. The Commission should not have, as up until now, the monopoly to propose legislation. Then another important matter has to do with fiscal issues, with taxation, with financial matters. And here we have two important restrictions that justify the interpretation or the claim that we still have a remaining democratic deficit. the budget, as I said before, is or the budgetary role or being the budgetary authority, this is something that the European Parliament has had from the beginning. But we have to be more precise. The Parliament has the power to adopt or to reject the budgetary proposal, both the annual budgets and the multi-annual budget that is called the multi-annual financial framework. However, the Parliament has no power whatsoever with the income of the budget. This is to say, how the budget is financed. So the Parliament can decide the amount of expenditures, can decide the allocation of the expenditures, whether to increase agriculture policy or to decrease it, and so on, but doesn't have any power as it regards where the income to finance the budget is coming from. And this is, of course, a paradox, because this is basically to say that the Parliament has the power to intervene on the level of spending and the distribution of spending, but not on the revenue side of the budget. So it's like a national parliament that has the power over the budget, but not the power over the taxes, which is what finances the budget. And this is an anomaly and a great democratic paradox. And this is also connected with the fact not only that the Council has exclusive legislative power on taxation, but also that is connected to the fact that taxation is subject to unanimity, which is also part of the democratic deficit, to the extent that some fundamental decisions in the Council, particularly foreign policy, defense, taxation, and social policy, in these four important policy fields, you have the rule of unanimity. And this is, of course, part as well of the democratic deficit, because democracy is, of course, the rule of the majority. It will be very nice if we are all in agreement about a decision. And of course, we can strive for maximum consensus or even unanimity, but we cannot really make that the absolute rule. If we were to decide now which color to use to paint the room or the classroom, and we are 30 in the classroom, it will be very nice if we all agree that we want to paint it in blue. But if there is just one or two people that are against painting it in blue, it is not reasonable that then we cannot take a decision, the other 28. And this is basically the situation we have in the EU when it comes to these very important and strategic policy fields: foreign policy, defense, taxation. The multi-annual budget also requires unanimity, which is a big hurdle, and social policy, and also the reform of the treaties also requires unanimity. So this is part of the democratic deficit, alongside these two other aspects that I mentioned about the powers of the Parliament: the power to initiate legislation and the power to vote on the revenue side, on the budget, and on taxation. Now, what can we do to tackle this democratic deficit? Well, obviously, we need to give this role to the Parliament that doesn't have, and we need to overcome this unanimity rule in the Council. It is true, we don't have unanimity for all policy fields. I have to be clear about that. So think of agriculture, think of cohesion policy, think of Erasmus, think of environment, think of consumer protection. So about 80% of policy fields, the Council decides by qualified majority voting. So this is an improvement of the Lisbon Treaty that we cannot overlook. So you have a few exceptions in which you apply unanimity, but these are qualitative, very important matters. I insist: foreign policy, defense, financial and fiscal issues, and social policy. So this is why we really need to tackle this question. Now, ways to solve the democratic deficit, the remaining democratic deficit. We can do some things within the current, let's say, constitutional framework within the Lisbon Treaty. It is not very easy, but there are some possibilities there. One possibility is to extend the ordinary legislative procedure to some of these matters, so Parliament is also involved in taxation and in social policy. But for that, you need unanimity. So all member states have to agree to give these powers to the Parliament. And this is probably not very likely that member states will give willingly or without any compensation or without any pressure, because member states understand, by and large, that if the Parliament becomes more important, they are less important. So they see it a bit of a zero-sum game. And then you have also the possibility in the treaty also to move unanimity decisions in the Council to majority decision. This is called the passerelles in the treaty. So the passerelles allow you, in theory, to move decisions from unanimity to majority, and also to involve Parliament in matters that it is currently not competent. However, these two decisions require unanimity, and this is difficult to achieve. What can be done about it? One possibility is for the European Parliament to use its budgetary power and basically tell the Council and the European Council, if you don't activate the passerelles, then I will not approve the budget, or I will not approve the multi-annual financial framework. This is a credible threat because member states really want to secure the funding for agriculture, for cohesion, for innovation, and for a range of policies. So Parliament must understand that the budgetary power is not an end in itself, something that you negotiate the budget or the multi-annual financial framework, which is the multi-annual budget for 7 years. You don't negotiate on budgetary files as a standalone item. Those are levers for achieving other things as well. So those are tools to improve the powers, to increase the powers of the Parliament, and to increase its institutional role in the European integration process. And this sometimes is not understood by the group leaders in the European Parliament or by the MEPs that are chairs in the budget committee or rapporteurs in the budget committee. They work and they negotiate their files in isolation. And this is really not the right approach. Secondly, we can as well reform the treaties. The reform of the treaties has been proposed by the European Parliament in November of 2023. And now it requires a follow-up by the European Council, which still has not happened. Yeah, and it will be next week, 2 years, without a reply from the European Council. The reform of the treaties is probably a more practical solution than the passerelles, because in a general reform of the treaty, you can make many deals and a lot of horse trading to compensate the member states that consider themselves losers if they give up the veto power, and also to, yes, in a way, be able to generate a negotiating dynamic that is different from, once again, trying to activate passerelles as standalone items, where there might not be the right incentives for member states to do so. The good thing is that the general reform of the treaties does not require unanimity to start the process. It is true it requires up until now unanimity at the end, but not at the beginning. So you only need a simple majority of member states in the European Council. And then with a general reform of the treaties, you can do more things than just the activation of the passerelles, even though that's a lot in itself, if it were to happen, because you can also reform Article 7 on the control of the rule of law that is not working in the member states because you need also decisions by member states. The Court of Justice is not involved and therefore is not really being utilized or is not being useful. And then you can also update policies in a reform of the treaties. We don't have, for instance, climate change as a policy in the current Lisbon Treaty, or we don't have digital matters or artificial intelligence. Of course, we are tackling them with ordinary legislation, but those are items that should feature in the treaty at the same level of agriculture policy, trade policy, and others. One last word, because I've been told I have to conclude. One last word on a very important matter that is typically overlooked by the institutions in order to increase democracy in the European Union and to tackle the remaining democratic deficit and to improve the role of citizens in European integration, which is citizenship, European citizenship education. And this is a strategic matter, but unfortunately, up until now, even though I was able to advance this matter as a rapporteur of this project in the European Parliament, but member states and Commission are not paying sufficient attention to this. The European citizenship is in the treaty since 1993, in 1992, but of course you need that people are aware that they are European citizens, that they are aware of the rights, of the benefits, of all the possibilities they have for democratic participation, which is not only to vote in European elections, it's also the right to petition and many others. So we really need to have a systematic approach. And as the Conference for the Future of Europe said, we need to be able to teach a minimum standard of knowledge about the EU in all member states. And without that, it will be very difficult to really improve and deploy a real European citizenship. I will have liked to tackle two other topics, but maybe I leave them for the questions and answers, which is that we need also to reform the way we elect the MEPs. We must be able to elect them also in transnational lists, not only in national lists. And we need also to have deliberative democracy at the European level. So I have been explaining a lot about parliamentary democracy, about representative democracy. There are many things we can do to have a true European parliamentary democracy, as I mentioned, but we also need to have, alongside it, a permanent system of European deliberative democracy. So the citizens can participate on a permanent basis and not only through voting in elections, even though this is very important. And by the way, we have been increasing the number of Europeans that participate in elections since 2009, which is a good thing. But we still have only 50% of citizens that vote in elections, in European elections, and we need also to improve that rate. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Domènec, not only for all the questions that you have addressed, but also for the historical, let's say, reconstruction and of the recalling of the process of democratization of the European Union. You have addressed plenty of things which are essential for strengthening democracy, both coming from the European competencies, but also the powers of the European institution, especially of the European Parliament, and also the ways to strengthen it, giving us plenty of different opportunities to strengthen European democracy, from the treaty reforms to the passerelle clauses, and also regarding the social aspect, let's say, and the cultural aspect of creating a European people which is who is aware of being part of a big community, which is the European Union. So thank you very much for this speech. Now I open the floor for the question coming from the school partners of this project. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand and I will give you the floor. Okay, maybe while we are waiting for some questions to be elaborated, let's say, after this comprehensive overview that you have given us, I can address to you a question, maybe also to clarify a bit more the reason why we are not just let's say in the European Union, not just the treaty reform has been taken into account, but also other possibilities. So my question is, since, as you have said, the citizen participation to the European elections, but in general election has decreased, like it has increased from 2008 when you were saying, but it has decreased from the very first election of the European Parliament because the numbers are completely different. So there is less, let's say, affection to the elections in general around Europe, as well as from the member states. So the Prime Minister and half those states who are sitting in the Council, there is less initiative towards a more integrated Europe, even though we are facing plenty of crises that need a stronger Europe to be addressed. Can you better explain to us what does it mean to have a passerelle clause, and which is the difference maybe with a treaty change in terms of democratic strengthening of the European Union, since we have not had a reform of the European treaties almost it's almost 10 years that we are not having, because the last one was the Lisbon Treaty. So this is my first question. And my second question, that maybe can also stimulate a bit the students' reaction, is what can the people do? Like, what would you suggest young people to do to give their own little grain of sand to the European democracy? Which is their contribution? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I start with the first question. Of course, we have in your first question, I think I see two dimensions, which is the question about participation in the elections and the question about the passerelles and the reform of the treaties. The question of participation, of course, you're right. In 1979, we had, I think, 70% even, if I'm not mistaken, of turnout in the European election. Then we had every 5 years, the participation went down, and the lowest point was reached in 2009. Since then, it has been increasing a little. In 2014, it increased maybe half a percentage point or even less. So it was basically 2014 was an stagnation compared to 2009, but at least for the first time, it did not continue to go down. Then in 2019, there was a big increase, 5 percentage points. And then again in 2024, there has been a very marginal increase, but at least once again, not a reduction. So basically, we can say that for the past 15 years, we are stuck in the 50% mark, 50% mark of participation. Of course, there are wide disparities. There are, countries that are well above 50%, also because they have mandatory vote, but not only. And then you have other countries that are at 20, 25%, like really low numbers. So we have to look also, of course, at the national dynamics and see what factor explains, for instance, this low number in Croatia, just to name one. But if we also want to develop a general strategy to increase interest and participation in the elections, then we need to change the way we elect MEPs. And this is something that I mentioned in my lecture, in my introduction, but I could not develop the argument, and I will do it now briefly. The reason we believe, many of us believe, the European elections, the elections to the European Parliament are not considered sufficiently important or interesting or exciting by many citizens, at least by half of the European citizens, in the average, is because it is not very clear what is the purpose of voting. Okay, it's to elect members of the European Parliament, provided they know that the European Parliament has legislative power, which is not evident to many citizens. And remember my point about the need for European citizenship education. But okay, provided that, for many, the European Parliament is not the one that elects the European so-called, allow me to call it government, no? Because the European Parliament, like any national parliament, in this case, we don't have a democratic deficit. On the contrary, we have a truly mechanism of a mechanism of a truly parliamentary democracy, that it is the European Parliament who elects the President of the Commission and the Commission as a whole in two different votes, which this is even more democratic than the majority of national democracies that I know, because in the majority of national democracies, the parliament elects the prime minister, but not also the government as a whole. But this is the case in Europe. So you need two votes, one for the president of the commission and one for the commission as a whole after. And this is, again, a traditional power of parliaments in parliamentary democracies, that they elect the head of government. In our case, it's the European Council that proposes to Parliament who should be the president of the Commission. But again, this is also the case in national democracies. You have either the president of the Republic or the king making a proposal after the elections, according to the results of the elections, to the Parliament, right? So, but again, how many citizens are aware of that? How many citizens are aware that the Parliament has that power? So for many citizens, electing MPs at the national level, it's okay, but what they are looking forward is not so much to elect MPs, and this is, of course, maybe a paradox in the evolution of parliamentary democracies, but this is the way it is. What they think they are doing as the main task of the election in a national democracy is to vote for a prime minister, right? Even though they don't really have the power to vote for a prime minister, because in Europe, we have, by and large, parliamentary democracies, not presidentialist democracies. So with the exception of France, that has a semi-presidential system, everyone is voting for a parliament that then elects the prime minister. So the power to elect the prime minister is in the hands of parliaments, formally. But materially, it is understood that if a party wins the most seats, in the normal case, then of course there might be coalitions composed by the other parties, but in the normal case, everyone expects that the party leader of the party that wins the most seats in parliament is going to become the prime minister. This is the dynamic now. Electing MEPs to make laws, of course, they may know they are also doing that, but it's not really, unfortunately, that's also a problem of parliamentary democracy in a way, the main interest of citizens. And in some countries, think of Spain, unfortunately, many citizens, if not the majority, don't even know who are the MPs they are voting, because we have, unfortunately, closed and blocked lists decided only by the party leaders, which is very undemocratic, by the way. So they don't know the MPs that they are electing, in fact, by name or by face, or what do they do in the national parliament. What they know is the party leader. Once again, in using Spain as an example, but it happens in many European countries, the party leader runs only in one constituency. In Spain, traditionally, because it's also the centralist tradition, unfortunately, the party leaders, all of them, which I don't agree, by the way, all of them run in Madrid. Why in Madrid? Because it's the capital, but many are not from Madrid. Many party leaders, I mean, but they run from Madrid, in Madrid. They don't run in the Alicante constituency, that's where I'm from. But if you ask in Alicante, they think they are voting for the party leaders that run in Madrid. Okay, all this long explanation to say that we need to replicate this in Europe somehow. So we need to make visible to the citizens that, okay, they are electing MEPs to make European laws. And of course, if they are of certain, if they support ideology A, then they should vote for MEPs that are of ideology, candidates for MEPs that are for ideology A. Okay, but we should design the system in a way that they can also be aware that by electing certain MEPs, they are also electing or supporting a candidate for president of the commission. And this is fundamental, in our view, to make the election more interesting and more appealing. Now, it is true we have the lead candidate system already in place since 2009, also known by the German word Spitzenkandidaten. This means that currently the main European political parties, Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Liberals in a very unclear way, and Greens, table candidates for President of the European Commission, which is an improvement, And they make a campaign, they go around some member states, they are elected in their congresses at the European level, and so on. However, they can only run for a seat in the European Parliament in their member states. They cannot run in Europe as a whole. This is if you want, the same way as it happens in national democracies. But with a difference. In national democracies, as I said before, you don't need to run as a party leader in all the constituencies for people to know that you are the party leader and that you want to be prime minister. This is very clear in the majority of member states, if not all. But that's not clear at the European level. And if we were now to run a poll and ask people, did you know von der Leyen was the candidate for Commission President of the EPP and that Nicola Schmidt was the candidate for Commission President of the Socialists and Democrats, I don't think you will get a large percentage of people delivering the right answer. So if we really want to have a transnational political campaign that is focused on European matters, because this is also a problem, what you have in European elections is national debates, not European debates by and large. So the European election is a collection of 27 national elections with national dynamics and national rules also to elect the MEPs, many with a few European rules. So then the European elections are used often as a test, as a pre-poll of the national election, or as a way to see whether the government is strong or the opposition is strong. But if you want to achieve three things: one, that you tackle European issues in European elections, and you debate about the programs of the European political parties. If you want to make visible that you have candidates for president of the Commission, and if you want to give visibility to European political parties, which now paradoxically almost never feature in the ballots, only the national political parties are visible in the ballots, with a few exceptions, like in Italy. Often the main parties use the logo or the European political party, but this is really an exception, unfortunately. So then you need a new system in which a number of MEPs, not all, but a number, a fraction, is elected transnationally. So you have now 59, no, a bit more, 62 members elected in Spain, for instance. Okay, this you can keep. You have a number also elected in Italy and other member states. But let's add another number. We were proposing in the European Parliament 28. So 28 candidates tabled by European political parties, with a number one that is the candidate for Prime Minister of Europe, let's say, with the logo of the party at the European level. And this ballot is available in all 27 member states. And with this system, we believe we can increase the level of interest in European elections, because then the citizen is empowered, and it is not only about electing, as important as it is, MEPs that are going to make European laws, European legislation, in a certain political way or ideological way, but they are also going to indicate who they want for Prime Minister of Europe, right? With the transnational system. And then regarding the second question, I think we have to engage in pro-European civil society organizations, because we can do a very effective, or we can try to do a very effective, the question about how the young people can contribute. I think they should join pro-European civil society organizations like the Young European Federalists, because the larger we are, the bigger our possibility to have an impact. Of course, we conduct a very strong and quite effective in some regards advocacy campaign. But of course, we cannot convince only with the power of our ideas or with the rightness of our ideas. We need also to show that we have many citizens behind us, and that as a grassroots movement, we have also an impact in the media and in the public opinion. So this will be my call to get engaged in a pro-European movement.
Thank you very much, Domènec. I saw that Lucia had a question. Yes, the floor is yours, Lucia. If you please can say, I mean, the partner you come from, and please, the floor is yours.
Hi. Firstly, thank you very much for the talk, Domènec. It was very interesting. Well, I'm from Spain. Really nice to meet you. And I don't know if you already answered my questions, but I wanted to know what institutional changes would be necessary in the European Union to allow citizens to vote for a transnational list of MEPs. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Lucia, for the question. As I mentioned before, we have from the European Parliament, I was, by the way, the rapporteur of that project, we have proposed a reform of the European electoral law, because in this matter, we do have legislative initiative. This is one of the three in which we have the power as an exception to the general rule of not having it, which is the European Electoral Act, the ombudsman and the powers of inquiry of the parliament. And this is normal that we do have the power in these matters because to propose legislation, because it's about how we elect the members of parliament, how we exercise our powers of inquiry as parliament, and how the ombudsman is elected and how the ombudsman is organized, because it is also the ombudsman acting on behalf of the European Parliament. Okay, so in 2022, by exercising our power, we proposed this reform to the European Electoral Act, which dates of 1979. It has been amended only once in 2003 in a rather marginal fashion, precisely to propose, among other things, there were other ideas also, like lowering the voting age to 16, or having a single voting day, which, as you know, we have several different voting days. But maybe the most, you can say, innovation was precisely that we were asking to elect a number of MEPs transnationally, 28, as I say. And we got the majority in the European Parliament. And by the way, this is not something that we can get for granted, because in the past, and even now, even in the European Parliament, we have strong opponents of electing some MEPs on a transnational basis, unfortunately. So in 2022, under my rapporteurship, but I was lucky also for something I will say, for the first time, the plenary endorsed a concrete proposal on how to elect these 28 MEPs transnationally. I said I was lucky because we had Brexit. And in this regard, Brexit was a good thing, because I'm sure that with the Brexit MEPs, the British MEPs, the proposal will have been rejected. Because with a few exceptions, all the British MEPs will have voted against it, considering too federalistic. Anyways, this is just as a side note, as an anecdote, if you want. Now, this is only the first step. Now you need the member states to support it by unanimity. Again, this is an unnecessary burden of the Lisbon Treaty that in this case, I don't even think you can solve with the passerelle, but I'm not sure, to be checked. But the situation is that 3 years after we approved the proposal, the Council of the European Union has not engaged in a negotiation with Parliament about its adoption. And once again, as I said at the beginning, on institutional matters, the Council has the tendency to not even to reject, but to avoid engaging and to avoid negotiating in good faith with Parliament. And in these cases, Parliament has two options. One, to use the budgetary power, I mentioned it before, or even to go to the Court of Justice, because in these cases, as in others, the Council is infringing the principle of good, loyal and sincere cooperation with the European Parliament.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Domènec. I would like to know if someone else has question for Domènec. So maybe just one last thing to also give, let's say, some hope from what people can do from the bottom, let's say. If you can tell us a bit what is the action committee you are a member of, and what is the purpose of this network, let's say, of different organizations. What do you advocate for? And yes, so I mean, what can also be the role of the civil society in shaping and strengthening European democracy? Because this is what you also do as Union of European Federalists, but also within the action committee. So I mean, as a last speech before concluding this conference, I think it can be useful also for the participants to have an overview on what the civil societies and the NGOs are doing for pushing for a more stronger Europe. And I think that the Action Committee is an interesting initiative that maybe can also be explained to all of the people that can also maybe be interested in following.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I will say two things on this. One is that we really need to step up our grassroots mobilization and advocacy at the national level, because we have advanced quite a bit with the European Parliament. It is true that with the current European Parliament, things are more difficult than in the previous one, the one I had the honor to serve in, because we have more powerful far-right parliamentary groups in this parliament than before, and a bit of a more of unclear opposition sometimes coming from the European People's Party. So the pro-European majority is a bit less cohesive, I will say, than in the previous parliament, and that has also an impact on the institutional battle, if you will. But the parliament has endorsed the proposal to reform the treaties, has endorsed the reform of the European law, has endorsed in this parliament our calls as federalists to establish a European common defense that is independent from Trump, that is independent from NATO. But clearly, the lack of action, the lack of leadership is coming from the Commission, and above all is coming from the Council. So we really need to engage and to convince some member states to lead the way and to take initiatives in the Council. So this is why I think also in a way our homework it's more in the national capitals and in the countries, and we will need as organized pro-European civil society to be more effective and more engaged with the national governments. I think that's a big task. And secondly, regarding the Action Committee for the United States of Europe, this was created in 1955 by Jean Monnet, also because at that time, he also felt that the problem was in the member states. So he left at the time the high authority, which was the Commission of the Coal and Steel Community, to engage directly with the national political parties. So he created this committee with heads of national political parties and heads of the national unions, trade unions, because he felt that was a source of power, of political power in the communities. Why? Because the Commission, he felt, was in a way, yes, a political authority, but not sufficiently empowered to lead the way or to lead the way alone. And then the Parliamentary Assembly was not elected by the citizens, which for Monnet was a big problem. So he did not consider the European Parliament as a source of political power in the Union until 1979, when it was elected by the citizens. So this is why the Action Committee tried to lobby through this gathering of national political leaders and trade unionists. And it worked for 20 years and it was very effective. It achieved the direct election of the European Parliament, but also at that time, it lobbied successfully for the accession of the UK. Then in the 1980s, it was reactivated by Max Constam, who had been his right-hand person in the first committee and also had been president of the European University Institute in Florence, its first president, by the way, its founding president. And he reactivated it in the 1980s with a different membership. So this time it was about, apart from a few former members of the original committee, also basically personalities that have long experience in the institutions. Maybe they were not in office anymore. So former prime ministers like Heath, like Schmidt, former commission officials, former commissioners, some political leaders at the time in office. And again, this was a successful lobby effort because he really provided the idea, maybe was not the only one, but it really played a role in the idea of the completion of the single market and the reform of the treaties of Rome as the main project of the Delors Commission. And this was important because each commission must have a big project, one big project. And this was the one of Delors, the single market by 1992, and the reform of the Rome treaties to have more majority rule in the treaties. And this was a success of the Second Action Committee. Now, in 2024, we have reactivated the committee again. It's more similar to the one of the 1980s than the one of 1955. So it's again composed of high-profile personalities that have already done a lot in European integration. Guy Verhofstadt, Josep Borrell, Hans-Gert Pöttering, Klaus Welle, Ana Palacio, Isabel Durant, Monica Frassoni, just to name some from the top of my mind, because we believe that if we can make concrete proposals that are endorsed by, sorry, just a moment. I thought I have connected my battery, but yeah, I put it in the wrong spot. Now it's connected. So we believe that if we can produce high quality inputs to the institutions that are endorsed by these, let's put it this way, big names, then we can have the authority and the impact in the current policymakers. You could say that this is a bit of an elitist approach, okay, clearly. And this is, by the way, interesting because Monet in 1955, he was offered the presidency of the Union of European Federalists. This is a little known fact. And he declined because for him, and this is written in his memoirs, for him, the real power was not in citizens' movements, in grassroots movements. The real power was in having access to the right people in high places of power. Well, I don't agree with that idea. I think that citizen mobilization can produce political change, and we have proved it. And the campaign for the direct election of the European Parliament is an example. And we have others, even the push for the European Constitution. But it is also true that we need to have access to the people that sits in the European Council, in the Council of Ministers, and in the Commission. So what we are doing since 2024 is to combine the two approaches. So the Union of European Federalists remains a grassroots citizens-based organization, but we have also tried to enlist these personalities that I mentioned in our team, let's say, so we can also do that kind of lobby that Monet invented in 1955, which is also necessary.
Poi se giri l'angolo... Ah, scusa.
Domenico, do you have a question that you raised? Domenico, sorry, Guido, did you have a question that you raised your hand?
Yes. I have a question concerning the European political parties, because there is a part of a democratic deficit of the European Union is not only in the Council, but the fact that the citizens understand that we have only coalition of national parties in the European Parliament, not real political party at the European level, in the European Parliament. So I think that a simple idea, but I think we should discuss this idea, is that we need real European Congress before the European election in order to choose the lead candidate for the Commission or so on. But in any case, the European citizens should take part to a democratic European Congress, for instance, in the Socialist Party, the Green already organized something like that. Maybe the solution could be that every national party which wish to be in the European Parliament should give the possibility, it is obliged to accept the membership of the citizens to their party in a way that there is also the automatic right to participate to National Congress and to European Congress, because that is a fact in which the European citizens can take part to to choose the great line, the great struggle for the European unity. So that is a problem of democracy. The European Party do not exist, and so there is a lack of people participation, citizen participation to the life of the European Union.
Thank you, Guido, for your contribution. I agree with you. The current European political parties are coalitions of national parties. Now, the problem is that the national parties, I don't know if we can say there is a conflict of interest, but almost, because the national political parties are not interested in the European political parties being real parties. And that's a big problem. I mean, something as simple as to put the symbol of the European political party in the ballots is not happening. I mean, the number of national political parties that put the name or the symbol of the European political party to which they belong in the European elections is almost zero. It happens in Italy, but more for national political reasons in a way, because it's prestigious for them. For instance, I will say for Forza Italia to say that they belong to European People's Party. Okay, fair enough. And the PD does it, I think, as well, for also a genuine European feeling. But no one else does it in Europe. No one else. No one else. Not even in Spain, where we all say we are very pro-European, at least with the exception of the far right. So we are unable to do that. We don't want to give visibility to the European political party to which we are affiliated in the European elections. Okay, I will be in favor, of course, of Guido's proposal, but I think they wouldn't do it so that, or the chances for them to do it voluntarily are even lower. To give the right to the members of their national parties to directly participate in the congresses at the European level. I think they will resist that very much. I will even be in favor of a primary to elect the lead candidate, but they don't want to do it, with the exception of the Greens. The rest don't want to do it because the prime ministers that tend to be the party leaders as well, also a questionable idea, but okay. And even the party leaders in opposition, they want that power for themselves. What they do is they gather in a room in Brussels and 20-something people decide who is the lead candidate. It's not really decided in the Congress, in an open Congress. Well, there have been exceptions. I remember once Stubb challenging Weber for the role, not Juncker, for the role in 2014. It's the only time that I remember. But in the European Socialist Party, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been a competitive Congress to elect the lead candidate. It's the national party leaders getting in a room and deciding it, and they don't want to change that. So there are no incentives to change that, to allow, for instance, by the way, the delegates to those congresses are also elected in very, hierarchical or cooptative way, But if we want the members at the national level to elect directly the delegates to the Congress, which will be the direct participation Guido is asking for, and to have a primary for lead candidate, you will not, and to put the symbols in the ballot, you will not have that out of alignment by national political party leaders. That will not happen, in my view. What you will need is to change the rules of the European Electoral Act, so hoping that not everyone in the national parties, particularly the apparatchiks, the secretaries of organization, which in some countries have an absolute power to create the electoral list, which is terrible and is undemocratic, but this happens also, that some of them will not realize the whole implications of the changing of the legislative rules. And this is why I think the transnational list can help. Because if we get the transnational lists, even to elect a limited number of MEPs, that will give a new power to the European political parties that they don't have at the moment. Because they will become the power brokers among the national political parties to create this transnational list. And this will force to put their symbols in this ballot, so more visibility, and the political discussion to establish this transnational list can have, second round effects in how the European political parties are organized.
Thank you, Domènec. I see that Guido has his hand already raised, but unfortunately, we have to, go to the conclusion to end the conference since the webinar, since there are some schools that I know they have to go back in their own classes. So I really want to thank Domènec for having take part into this webinar and for the lecture that you have given to us. I also want to thank all the schools who are participating in this conference and those who posed the question. The webinar is also available on YouTube, so it has been recorded and it can also be shared via your own personal channels, and I'm telling this to the school's partners, so you can also share in your own school website and social media. So again, thank you very much, and I hope that you all enjoyed this precious moment of confronting with an important stakeholder as Domènec. So thank you really again, and I hope you a good day. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah, and greetings to all the students and to Guido.
Thank you very much to all. Bye.